The slap came without warning. 7 witnesses, 1 phone recording, a 6-year-old watching her mother's face snap sideways. The officer had no idea he'd just assaulted the wrong woman. By tomorrow, his boss would hand him papers that would destroy everything. But first, let's go back to how this started. Before you watch what happens to her on that street, I need you to do something. Subscribe right now, because the next few minutes will completely change how you see this woman and the man standing over her. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far her story travels. Let's begin our story. The sound cut through the convenience store like breaking glass. Not the cash register, not a dropped bottle, something worse, something that made time stop and breathing feel illegal. Caroline Windfall's head whipped sideways, the force snapping her vision into fragments. Fluorescent lights, candy wrappers, her daughter's face frozen in confusion that would curdle into trauma in about 3 seconds. The burning came next, a handprint of fire across her left cheek, radiating outward in waves that made her teeth ache and her eyes flood with tears she absolutely refused to shed. Not here, not now, not in front of Maya. Officer David Boogie stood with his palms still raised, fingers trembling, but it wasn't remorse shaking through his hand. Caroline had seen enough courtrooms, enough depositions, enough men who mistook uniforms for immunity to recognize the difference between regret and rage. This was rage, pure, undiluted, barely leashed. "You don't talk to me like that," he hissed, voice low enough that the security camera probably wouldn't pick it up, calculated even in fury. "You don't ever talk to me like that." 7 witnesses. Caroline's lawyer brain cataloged them automatically, even as her mother brain screamed to grab Maya and run. The cashier with his hand hovering over the register, mouth forming a silent O. 2 college students near the beer cooler, an elderly man by the magazines, a woman with a shopping basket, the teenage boy Boogie had been harassing 30 seconds ago, and whoever had their phone out, that rectangle of light in her peripheral vision, recording everything. Good. Let them watch. Let them bear witness. Maya pressed herself against the candy display, still clutching the chocolate bar she'd been begging for. She was 6, old enough to understand pain, too young to understand why a man with a badge thought he could deliver it. Caroline touched her face slowly, deliberately. The heat beneath her fingertips felt like proof of something she'd been arguing in courtrooms for 15 years, that authority without accountability was just violence with paperwork. She'd only asked a question, simple, direct. "Why are you questioning that kid? He's just waiting for his mother." The boy had been doing nothing, scrolling his phone by the entrance, existing while black in a public space, which apparently required police intervention in Boogie's world. And when Caroline spoke up, when she dared to question, when she reminded this officer that badges don't grant permission to harass children, he'd decided to remind her what powerlessness felt like. Except he'd made one critical miscalculation. Caroline Windfall had never been powerless in her life. "Badge number," she said. Her voice came out steady, quiet, absolutely immovable. The kind of voice she used when opposing counsel tried to intimidate her in federal court. It never worked there either. Boogie's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, and Caroline could smell him now. Burnt coffee, stale sweat, and something sour that might have been fear disguised as aggression. His hand drifted toward his belt, not to the badge, to the gun. A gesture, a reminder, an unspoken threat wrapped in the silence between them. "You didn't say what?" he asked, though they both knew he'd heard her perfectly. "Your badge number. I'm asking for it." The phone was definitely recording now. Caroline could see the college girl holding it steady, her face pale but determined, another witness who refused to look away. Boogie's jaw clenched so hard Caroline could hear his teeth grinding. "You're making a mistake, lady." Caroline looked at him then, really looked, and saw exactly who he was. Not a protector, not a servant of justice, just a man who'd been given a uniform and decided it made him untouchable, who'd been questioned by a black woman in front of witnesses and couldn't tolerate the humiliation of accountability. "The only mistake," Caroline said, her voice carrying now, making sure everyone heard, "is thinking I won't remember your name." She took Maya's hand, turned her back on him, walked toward the door with her spine straight and her head high, even though every cell in her body wanted to collapse. Only when they reached the car, only when the doors were closed and Maya was buckled in the back seat, only then did Caroline let her hands shake on the steering wheel. "Mama?" Maya's voice was so small, so scared. "I'm okay, baby. That policeman hurt you. I know. Are you going to tell someone?" Caroline looked in the rearview mirror, met her daughter's eyes, saw that terrible, beautiful innocence that the world would try to strip away one injustice at a time, saw the question beneath the question, "Will you let him get away with this?" "Yes," Caroline said, and in that moment she felt something shift inside her chest, not just anger, something colder, more focused, more dangerous. "I'm going to tell everyone." What Officer David Boogie didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he stood in that convenience store, already rehearsing the lies he'd put in his report, was that he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. He'd assumed the woman he slapped was nobody. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Caroline's apartment smelled like the lavender candles her mother used to burn. The scent hit her as she unlocked the door, Maya's hand still gripped tight in hers, and for a moment she couldn't breathe around the grief. Her mother had been gone 4 months. Cancer had taken her piece by piece, and Caroline had watched, helpless despite all her degrees and courtroom victories and carefully constructed arguments. You couldn't cross-examine death, couldn't file an injunction against tumors. She'd taken a leave of absence to be there, 6 months stepping away from Redfield and Associates, the premier civil rights firm where she'd built her reputation dismantling police departments and rewriting discriminatory policies. 6 months of hospital rooms and hospice care, and trying to explain to Maya why Grandma couldn't get out of bed anymore. 6 months of being just Caroline, just a daughter, just a mother. No briefcase, no power suits, no federal judges who knew her name. That's who she'd been today. Jeans and a faded Howard University sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no makeup. Just a woman buying groceries with her kid, trying to make it through another Tuesday without falling apart. That's who David Boogie had seen when he looked at her. Just another black woman he could put in her place. Maya climbed onto the couch, still clutching that chocolate bar. She hadn't opened it, just held it like a talisman against the memory of what she'd witnessed. "You can eat it, baby," Caroline said softly. "I'm not hungry anymore." Caroline's heart cracked a little more. She sat beside her daughter, pulled her close, and felt Maya's small body trembling. "That was wrong," Maya whispered. "What he did. That was wrong, right?" "Yes." "But he's a police officer. Aren't they supposed to be good?" How do you explain institutional racism to a 6-year-old? How do you tell your child that the people who are supposed to protect her might see her as a threat instead? That the uniform doesn't always mean safety? That she'll have to learn to navigate a world where her skin color determines how she's treated before she's even old enough to understand why? "Most officers are trying to do good work," Caroline said carefully, but some of them forget that the badge doesn't make them better than everyone else. Some of them think it makes them untouchable. What does untouchable mean? It means they think nobody can hold them accountable for what they do. They think they can hurt people and get away with it. Maya looked up at her, eyes still red-rimmed. Can they? Caroline thought about the cases she'd worked, the mothers who'd called her sobbing because their sons were dead and the officers who killed them were on paid leave, the teenagers brutalized during traffic stops, the families torn apart by violence disguised as law enforcement, the system that protected its own no matter how many lives it destroyed. She thought about her mother's voice in those final weeks. Baby, you fight the fights that matter. Don't waste your fire on battles you can't win. And then she thought about Maya's face in that convenience store, the fear, the confusion, the loss of innocence happening in real time. Not this time, Caroline said. This time, someone's going to answer for what they did. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop since they got home. She'd been ignoring it, focused on Maya, but now she picked it up and scrolled through the notifications. 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, hundreds of social media notifications. The video was already spreading. Caroline opened Twitter and watched herself get slapped in high definition, again and again, each replay like a fresh violation. The comments ranged from outrage to support to the predictable contingent of people convinced she must have done something to deserve it. But the view count kept climbing, 40,000, 60,000, 90,000. Her personal email was flooded too, former colleagues reaching out, activists offering support, reporters wanting statements, 3 different civil rights organizations asking if she needed legal representation. The irony would have been funny if her face still didn't hurt. Caroline Windfall didn't need legal representation. She was legal representation. Harvard Law, class of 2007, 15 years specializing in civil rights and police malpractice. She'd won cases against some of the most corrupt departments in the country, made captains sweat in depositions, cost cities millions in settlements, forced policy reforms that protected thousands of people who'd never even know her name. She'd argued in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals twice, won both times. Last year, she dismantled a department's entire stop and sprick program with a lawsuit so airtight the city settled before it ever reached trial. 2 years before that, she'd secured a 7-figure settlement for a family whose son was killed during a no-knock warrant at the wrong address. She had a reputation, the kind whispered in precincts when her name appeared in legal filings, the kind that made police unions hire the most expensive defense attorneys they could find. And David Boogie just slapped her in front of witnesses. Caroline scrolled to her contacts, found the number she'd called 1,000 times before her leave of absence, hesitated for just a moment. Going back meant facing the world again, meant stepping out of grief and into the fight, meant trading Maya's bedtime stories for late nights reviewing depositions, meant becoming Caroline Windfall Esquire again, instead of just Caroline, the woman trying to hold her life together with duct tape and determination. But maybe that's exactly what she needed. Maybe Boogie just reminded her who she was. She hit dial. Marcus Chen answered on the second ring. "Caroline, I saw the video. Are you okay?" "I'm coming back," she said simply. "When?" "Tomorrow." She looked at Maya, who had finally fallen asleep on the couch, chocolate still clutched in her small fist. "And I'm bringing a case with me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me you're going after him." "I'm going to do more than that," Caroline said, her voice steady and cold and absolutely certain.
I'm going to make sure every officer in this city knows that badges don't grant immunity, that there are consequences, that slapping a woman in front of her child isn't just a violation of policy, it's a violation of her civil rights under Section 1983. Marcus finished. He could hear the smile in his voice. "Welcome back, counselor. Let's destroy this guy's career." Caroline hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment, her daughter sleeping peacefully now, her cheek still burning with the memory of violence. David Boogie thought he'd won something today, thought he'd put an uppity woman in her place, thought the uniform and the badge and the gun made him invincible. He was about to learn what happens when you mistake silence for weakness and kindness for powerlessness.
David Boogie sat in his patrol car 3 hours after the incident, filling out the report that would either save his career or end it. His hand still tingled from the impact, not with remorse, he'd tell himself later, but with the muscle memory of contact. Skin on skin, power asserted, authority restored. She'd made him do it. That's what he'd tell anyone who asked. What he'd already convinced himself was true. The woman had been aggressive, confrontational. She'd stepped between him and a potential suspect. That teenager loitering by the door definitely looked suspicious, and when he'd asked her to step back, she'd gotten in his face, started yelling, made a scene. He'd felt threatened. That's what he typed into the incident report. Subject became verbally aggressive and physically confrontational when asked to step away from an ongoing investigation. After repeated requests to calm down, subject continued escalating behavior. Officer felt threatened and used minimal necessary force to establish control of the situation. Minimal necessary force, the magic phrase that had protected him before. Boogie had been on the force for 12 years, not the best cop, not the worst, somewhere in the comfortable middle where you could coast if you kept your head down and your paperwork clean. He had 3 excessive force complaints in his file, all dismissed, all explained away with the same careful language he was using now. Felt threatened, aggressive subject, necessary force. The system protected its own, always had, always would. He finished the report, submitted it electronically, and drove home feeling like he dodged a bullet. Sure, people had been filming, but the video wouldn't show what happened before, wouldn't capture her tone, her attitude, the way she disrespected him in front of everyone. The union would back him. His captain knew he was a good officer. A few days of desk duty, maybe some sensitivity training, and this would blow over like everything else. David Boogie had no idea his life was already over. He just hadn't received the notice yet. By midnight, the video had 40,000 views. By 3 a.m., it crossed 200,000. By the time the sun rose over the city, "Officer strikes unarmed black woman" was trending nationally. Caroline watched it happen from her kitchen table, laptop open, phone buzzing continuously. Maya was asleep in her room, finally settled after hours of nightmares about men in uniforms and sounds that echoed like gunshots. The video was everywhere: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok. Local news stations had picked it up. CNN was running it with expert commentary. The New York Times had already published a piece connecting it to broader patterns of police violence. The comments were what you'd expect: outrage from some, defense from others. The usual divide that appeared whenever police brutality entered the national conversation. But the view count kept climbing, and with it, the pressure. Caroline's email inbox was chaos. Interview requests from every major news outlet, calls from activists wanting her to speak at rallies, other victims of police violence reaching out to share their stories.
lawyers offering to take her case pro bono, not knowing she didn't need their help. And then there were the other messages, the threats. Anonymous accounts telling her she should have kept her mouth shut, that she got what she deserved, that if she didn't like police, she should try living without them. Worse things, too, violent fantasies from strangers who saw a black woman challenging authority and couldn't tolerate it. Caroline had seen it all before, worked cases where her clients received death threats just for demanding accountability. She knew how to filter the noise, how to focus on what mattered. But seeing Maya's face in the video, that moment of confusion turning to fear, made it personal in a way her other cases never had been. This wasn't just about systemic reform anymore. This was about making sure her daughter knew that justice wasn't just a concept. It was something you fought for, something you demanded, something you made happen, even when the system was designed to deny it. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen, calling at 5:47 a.m. "You're trending number 3 on Twitter," he said without preamble, right below some celebrity divorce and above a presidential scandal. The mayor's office just issued a statement promising a full investigation. The police union released a counter-statement defending the officer, and I've had 6 reporters call asking if you're planning to sue. "Are we?" Caroline asked. "That depends. Do you want to send a message or do you want to change the system?" "Both." Marcus laughed. "Then we're filing in federal court. Civil rights violation under Section 1983. Excessive force, assault, emotional distress. We're going after Boogie personally and the department institutionally. We're demanding policy reform, mandatory body cameras, independent oversight, and enough money that the city feels it in their budget for the next decade." "When?" Caroline asked. "I'm drafting the complaint now. We file by end of day Friday. That gives us 72 hours to build an airtight case and generate maximum media coverage. This isn't just a lawsuit, Caroline. This is a reckoning." Through her window, Caroline could see the sun rising over the city. Somewhere out there, David Boogie was probably sleeping peacefully, convinced he'd gotten away with it. He had no idea what was coming. "Make it hurt," Caroline said quietly. "Make it hurt so much that every cop in this city thinks twice before they put their hands on someone who can't fight back." Considered it done.
The envelope landed on David Boogie's desk at 9:15 a.m. on Friday morning. Plain manila, official seal, the kind of package that meant nothing good. Captain Rita Hollis stood beside his desk, arms crossed, face carved from granite. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. Boogie opened it, hands steady despite the sudden twist in his gut. Legal documents, dense text, official letterhead from Redfield and Associates, one of the most aggressive civil rights firms in the state. He read the first page twice before the words actually registered. United States District Court. Civil Rights Complaint. Carolyn Windfall, plaintiff. Versus Officer David Boogie and City Police Department, defendants. His eyes skipped down. Section 1983, excessive force, assault and battery, intentional emotional distress, demanding compensatory damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, and injunctive relief, including mandatory policy reform. The number at the bottom made his vision blur. $5 million. $5 million. "This is bullshit," he said, the words coming out strangled. "She was aggressive. I felt threatened. I wrote it all in my report." "Your report," Hollis interrupted, her voice cold enough to freeze water, says you used minimal necessary force on an aggressive subject who was physically confrontational. The video, which has now been viewed over 2 million times, shows you slapping a woman holding a shopping basket who asked for your badge number. I didn't. Yes, you did. Hollis leaned forward, both hands on his desk. We have 7 witness statements. All of them contradict your report, including an off-duty firefighter who has 0 reason to lie. The video shows exactly what happened. And you know what the worst part is? Boogie couldn't speak. The worst part is that you filed a false report, which means even if we wanted to defend you, which we don't, we can't, because you lied in official documentation about using force against a civilian. I was protecting myself. From a 5'4" woman holding groceries? You're 6'2" and armed, David. Who exactly was in danger? Boogie's hands curled into fists, the papers crumpled under his grip. You don't understand. She was disrespectful. She questioned my authority in front of everyone. I had to... Had to what? Reassert dominance? Remind her of her place? Hollis straightened, disgust radiating from every line of her body. You hit a woman because she made you feel small. And now it's going to cost this department millions. The union will back me. They always do. Hollis laughed, but there was no humor in it. The union released a statement this morning. They're distancing themselves from you. The mayor's office is demanding your termination. The DA is reviewing whether to press criminal charges. And the woman you slapped? She tapped the lawsuit. She's not some random civilian you can intimidate into dropping charges. Carolyn Windfall is one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the country. She's argued in front of federal appellate courts. She's taken down entire police departments. Last year alone, she cost 3 cities a combined $12 million in settlements. The blood drained from Boogie's face. And you slapped her, Hollis continued, each word hitting like a hammer. In front of witnesses, in front of her 6-year-old daughter, while being recorded, after she asked for your badge number. She pulled a document from the envelope and placed it in front of him. You're suspended without pay pending investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon. Don't talk to the press. Get a lawyer. A good one, because you're going to need it. And David? She paused at the door, her back to him. Start thinking whether this job was worth what it's about to cost you. Because by the time Carolyn Windfall is done, you won't have a career, a pension, or a shred of credibility left. The door closed behind her with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid. Boogie sat alone in the precinct, the lawsuit spread before him, and for the first time since that convenience store, he felt something that might have been fear. He'd thought he was untouchable, thought the badge made him invincible. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was.
6 weeks later, Caroline sat across from David Boogie in a conference room that smelled like desperation and recycled air. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Not the settlement negotiations that would come later. Not the policy reforms that were already being drafted. This, the deposition. The moment when Boogie would have to sit across from the woman he'd assaulted and answer for what he'd done. His lawyer, a man named Pearson with expensive cufflinks and rehearsed sympathy, had tried every trick in the book to delay this. Motion to dismiss, motion for summary judgment, requests for continuances. Nothing worked. Caroline's case was airtight, her documentation flawless, her witness list devastating. Now, here they were. Boogie looked smaller than she remembered. The uniform was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting suit that made him look like a child playing dress-up. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable. Let him experience a fraction of the powerlessness he tried to inflict. The court reporter settled in. The camera started recording. Pearson cleared his throat. Let's begin. For the next 3 hours, Caroline watched as her legal team methodically dismantled every piece of Boogie's defense. Had he received training in de-escalation? Yes. Had he followed that training? No. Did he consider verbal alternatives before using physical force? No. Did he perceive the subject as an immediate physical threat? The hesitation before answering told Caroline everything she needed to know. When asked to describe Caroline's behavior, Boogie stumbled through his fabricated narrative. She'd been aggressive, confrontational, physically threatening. But when pressed for specifics, what exactly had she said? What movements had she made? Where were her hands? His story fell apart. The video didn't lie, and under oath, with his career already burning around him, neither could he. Pearson tried to paint Caroline as someone with a vendetta against police, tried to introduce her professional history as evidence of bias, tried to suggest she'd provoked the encounter deliberately. Caroline answered each question with surgical precision, calm, factual, devastating. I asked an officer performing his duties why he was questioning a minor without apparent cause, she said, her voice steady. That's not provocation. That's citizenship. That's parenting. That's me teaching my daughter that authority isn't absolute and that justice requires witnesses. Boogie stared at the table. Caroline leaned forward slightly. Officer Boogie, do you have children? Pearson started to object, but Boogie answered anyway. A son. He's 8. What would you want him to do if he saw someone being mistreated? The silence stretched. Pearson's hand hovered over his notes, unsure whether to interrupt. The court reporter's fingers paused on the keys. Everyone in the room waited. I'd want him to speak up, Boogie said, finally, his voice barely audible. Then you understand why I did. It wasn't dramatic. No one raised their voice. No tears were shed. But in that moment, Caroline saw something crack in Boogie's facade. Not remorse exactly, but recognition, a fleeting awareness of what he'd done and who he'd done it to. It wouldn't change anything, wouldn't undo the violence or erase Maya's nightmares or restore the innocence stolen in that convenience store, but it was something. After the deposition, Marcus pulled Caroline aside in the hallway. The city wants to settle, he said quietly. They know they can't win this. The video's too clear, the witnesses too credible, your case too strong. They're terrified you'll take it to trial, and the jury will award triple what you're asking. What are they offering? Marcus showed her the number. Caroline looked at it for a long time. Enough money to retire, enough to set up Maya's future, enough to fund the legal aid organizations she believed in, enough to hurt the city's budget enough that they'll think twice before defending the next bad cop. What are the terms? Asked Caroline. Full settlement. Boogie resigns. Department implements mandatory de-escalation training, body cameras for all officers, and an independent review board for misconduct complaints. Everything you wanted. And the admission of wrongdoing? They won't put it in writing. Best we can get is settlement without admission of liability. Caroline thought about her mother, about Maya, about Jordan, the teenager Boogie was harassing, about every person who'd ever been victimized by someone with a badge who thought they were above accountability. Counter with this, she said, and named a number slightly higher, and I want Boogie's resignation in writing, with a clause that prevents him from working in law enforcement anywhere in this state. I want the settlement funds split, half to me, half to a fund for families who can't afford legal representation in civil rights cases, and I want the policy reforms implemented within 90 days with quarterly progress reports. Marcus smiled. They're going to hate that. Good. Let them hate it while they write the check. 2 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. Caroline Windfall had won, but more importantly, the system had been forced to bend.
The news of the settlement broke on a Tuesday morning. City settles police brutality case for undisclosed amount, read the headlines. Department to implement sweeping reforms.
Caroline read the articles over coffee, Maya eating cereal at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through windows that suddenly felt less heavy. The money had hit her account yesterday, more than she'd ever made in a single case, more than she'd thought the city would agree to, enough to change her life, Maya's future, and fund legal battles for families who'd never have a chance otherwise. She'd already contacted 3 legal aid organizations. Half the settlement would be split between them, no strings attached, just resources to fight the fights that mattered. The other half she'd invested in Maya's education fund and a small reserve for the unexpected emergencies that life seemed to specialize in delivering. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the email she'd received that morning from Captain Rita Hollis. Mandatory training begins next month. Body cameras arrive in 2 weeks. Independent Review Board holds its first session on Friday. You changed things here. Thank you. Caroline hadn't expected gratitude from the department, hadn't needed it, but seeing those words from someone inside the system felt like validation that this had been about more than revenge. This had been about forcing accountability where none had existed. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. CNN wants you for an interview tonight. So does MSNBC. The Times is doing a feature on civilian oversight and wants your perspective. Oh, and you got an invitation to speak at the National Civil Rights Conference next month. You're kind of famous. Caroline laughed. I don't want to be famous. I want to be effective. You're both. Embrace it. This case is going to open doors, Caroline. You can use this platform to push for change nationally. She thought about that, about stepping into the spotlight permanently, about becoming the face of police reform, about the interviews and the conferences and the constant requests to comment on every new case of brutality that made headlines. It sounded exhausting. It also sounded necessary. Set up the CNN interview, she said, but I'm doing it on my terms. I talk about policy reform, not about boogie. I talk about systemic change, not individual vindication. This isn't about me getting revenge. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else's daughter. You're going to make me cry in a very professional, attorney-like way. After she hung up, Caroline sat with her coffee and thought about David Boogie. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd moved out of state, took a job in private security somewhere in Arizona. No law enforcement, no badge, no authority to abuse. Part of her wondered if he'd learned anything, if that moment in the deposition had actually penetrated, if he lay awake at night thinking about the woman he'd slapped and the daughter who'd watched and the career he'd destroyed through his own arrogance. Probably not. People like Boogie rarely engage in that kind of self-reflection. But it didn't matter. He was gone. And in his place were new policies, new oversight, new systems designed to catch the next officer who thought badges granted immunity. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was progress. And progress was worth fighting for. Maya wandered over, climbing into Caroline's lap even though she was getting too big for it. Mama, are you still sad about the policeman? No, baby, I'm not sad anymore. Are you happy? Caroline thought about the answer. Was she happy? The lawsuit was over. Justice had been served. Maya's nightmares were becoming less frequent. The reforms were real. But her mother was still gone. The world was still broken in 1,000 different ways. There were still officers out there who thought they could get away with violence. Still families grieving. Still injustices that no settlement could fix. I'm hopeful, Caroline said, finally. And sometimes that's better than happy. Maya nodded like she understood, even though she probably didn't, not yet. But someday she would. Someday she'd learn that justice wasn't a destination, it was a direction, a constant effort towards something better. And maybe, just maybe,
She'd remember the day her mother got slapped and refused to stay down. Maybe that would be the lesson that mattered most.
2 years later, on a morning that felt like any other, Caroline received a letter. The handwriting was careful, almost childish in its precision. No return address, just a date and a few paragraphs written on notebook paper. She opened it while Maya, now 8 and asking questions about law school, ate breakfast. Ms. Windfall, you don't know me, but I was in that store. I was the kid by the door, the one the officer was harassing before you said something. Caroline's breath caught. She sat down, suddenly needing the chair's support. I think about that day a lot, about how scared I was, about how no one was doing anything until you did, about your daughter watching. She remembered him, lanky teenager, maybe 16, scrolling on his phone while Boogie invented reasons to question him, another black kid existing in public, which apparently required police intervention. I'm in college now, pre-law, because of you. Caroline's eyes blurred. Because someone showed me that standing up doesn't mean you have to scream. Sometimes it just means refusing to look away. Thank you for not looking away. Jordan. She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer next to Maya's latest report card and a photo from the protest march they'd attended last month. This was why the fight mattered. Not the settlement, not the reforms, not even the justice, but the kid who'd been harassed for no reason, who'd watched a woman stand up for him, who'd decided that meant something, who'd chosen a path because someone had shown him that dignity was worth defending. Caroline had changed the system, yes, but she'd also changed a life. And maybe that was the real victory. She pulled out her phone and texted Marcus, I want to start a scholarship fund for students pursuing civil rights law, especially kids from communities impacted by police violence. His response came immediately. How much? Whatever it takes. Caroline stood in her office, looking out at the city that had tried to break her and failed. 3 years since that convenience store. 3 years since the slap heard round the internet. 3 years since she'd decided that staying silent wasn't an option. The scholarship fund had launched 6 months ago, already supporting 12 students. Jordan was one of them, thriving at State University, with dreams of becoming a prosecutor who actually believed in justice. The reforms were holding. Not perfectly, nothing ever was, but body cameras were mandatory. The review board had investigated 47 cases, and 3 officers had been terminated for misconduct that previously would have been swept under the rug. Maya was asking to come to work with her, wanted to see what a lawyer actually did, wanted to understand the cases, the depositions, the fights. Caroline's mother would have been proud. On her wall hung a framed dollar bill with a plaque beneath it, the cost of silence. She'd put it up as a reminder that staying quiet was always easier, that speaking up meant risk and confrontation and potential consequences. But silence had a price too. It cost dignity, it cost justice, it cost the futures of kids like Jordan who needed to see someone refuse to look away. Her phone buzzed. Another case, another family needing representation, another officer who'd forgotten that badges don't grant immunity. Caroline read the details, felt the familiar fire in her chest, and started drafting the complaint. Somewhere across the country, David Boogie was living a smaller life. No uniform, no authority, no power except what he could earn through actual merit. He tried to make her small, tried to remind her of her place, tried to use violence to enforce a hierarchy that existed only in his imagination. Instead, he'd reminded her exactly how powerful she'd always been. That was the real consequence.
Not the lawsuit or the settlement or even the reforms. The consequence was that he would spend the rest of his life knowing he'd slapped a woman who refused to flinch, who'd stood up not just for herself, but for her daughter, for Jordan, for every person who'd ever been victimized by someone who thought a badge made them untouchable. He'd tried to silence her, and instead she'd become louder. He'd tried to diminish her, and instead she'd grown stronger. He'd tried to teach her powerlessness, and instead she'd reminded the whole system what accountability looked like. Caroline finished drafting the complaint for the new case, emailed it to Marcus, poured another coffee. Outside her window, the city moved in its chaotic rhythm. Somewhere, someone was being seen. Somewhere else, someone was being overlooked. The work was endless, exhausting, essential. But she'd learned something in that convenience store 3 years ago, standing in front of her daughter with her cheek burning and her voice steady. Dignity wasn't something someone else could take from you. Justice wasn't something you waited for. And silence was never the answer. She picked up her pen and continued writing. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But today, right now, in this moment, she was winning. And that was enough.